In 1 Corinthians chapter 5, Paul sort of pivots and starts getting more specific about the dysfunction in the church in Corinth. In the first 4 chapters, he had talked about how they were consumeristic and they were all about their favorite preachers, but they weren't really going deeper in the sense of really applying the basic truths that Paul had been teaching into their lives. And this can happen in our lives as followers of Jesus. We can kind of become consumer Christians and we make it all about who's preaching and what we're learning rather than actually applying it and moving on to honor God in our everyday life and choices. He says this, I can hardly believe the report about the sexual immorality going on among you, something that even pagans don't do. And then here he gets specific. I'm told that a man in your church is living in sin with his stepmother, and you are so proud of yourselves, but you should be mourning in sorrow and shame, and you should remove this man from your fellowship. Okay, so Paul is going to get specific with them about a very clear sin, and somehow they must have justified this away in their great knowledge and learning. And sometimes we can do this as followers of Jesus. The more we learn, the less we actually live it out. And this is what was happening in this dysfunctional church in Corinth. Now, take a look at what he says, and I'll let you read this for yourself, but we're going to scroll down and read this section starting in verse 9. And this is a short chapter, but it really is challenging for every Christian today. He says this, when I wrote to you before, I told you not to associate with people who indulge in sexual sin. But he says, I wasn't talking about unbelievers who do it, or who are greedy, or cheat people, or worship idols. Why? Because you would have to leave this world to avoid people like that. In other words, he says, if someone isn't pursuing God, if someone isn't a Christian, you don't really hold them to a biblical standard because they haven't signed up for that. They don't even know about honoring God. They haven't even trusted Jesus for salvation. They don't even have the Holy Spirit at work in their lives in order to honor God in their everyday lives. But look what he says in verse 11. But I meant that you are not to associate with anyone who claims to be a believer and yet indulges in sexual sin, or is greedy, or worships idols, or is abusive, or is a drunkard, or cheats people. He says, don't even eat with such people. Now, I know as you read this, you're probably thinking, wait a second, this doesn't sound biblical. This doesn't sound loving, and yet here it is right in the Bible. So let's scroll down and see if we can understand what Paul's teaching them. He says, it isn't my responsibility to judge outsiders, people who aren't Christians. He says, but it is certainly your responsibility to judge those inside the church who are sinning. He says, God will judge those on the outside, but as the scriptures say, you must remove the evil person from among you. So, how do we apply this to our church? Well, first of all, I think you should prayerfully read this chapter, really think about it in your own life, and understand that what Paul is saying is this. If you are a follower of Jesus, it is your responsibility to help other people in your world to honor God if they also are followers of Jesus. It is irresponsible for us as Christians to just say about another Christian, oh, well, no, I know that's sin, but hey, who am I to judge? I'm not going to tell them that they're dishonoring God. Paul would say, no, you should lovingly call them out if they're, again, let's scroll back up there, if they're indulging in sexual sin, or if they're greedy, or if they worship idols, or if they're abusive, or if they're drunkards, or if they cheat people. And this isn't an exhaustive list, but I think it's a good start, and I think it's pointing to a deeper principle. And the point is this. If you are a follower of Jesus, you should not just be a consumer Christian who goes to church on Sunday, you have your favorite preachers, but you never apply it in your everyday life. You never get to honoring God in your everyday life. If that's true of you, I hope and pray that you have someone in your life that will lovingly call you out on it and help you to really follow God the way that Paul is describing it here to the Corinthians. So, you're ready to read chapter 5. We'll see you tomorrow for chapter 6.